All right, welcome everyone to the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting on the 25th of July, 2017. We'll go ahead and get started. We had a slight discussion before the recording began about features for 1.8 and the feature freeze, which is coming up in about a week. Jace, do you want to just recap that briefly so it gets caught in the recording?
Yeah, absolutely. So the feature freeze is a week from today, August 1st. And essentially, that deadline means that we need to have basic documentation about what the feature is, the one-liner that'll be used for marketing. And it sounds like there's some great stuff happening. So I'm the release lead. And one of the things that happened last release was that there's a little bit of rough edges around the communication between the work on kubeadm and the release and blocking tests. So I want to make sure that we're very proactive about making sure everything you guys do is on board with the release and that we're all connected. So that's my public service announcement.
Thanks. And you also asked for a representative from the SIG
Yes.
to attend the SIG PM meetings, which are, I guess, bi-weekly. Is it the hour before this meeting? So 8 a.m. Pacific time?
2 hours before, I believe.
2 hours before this, okay.
Yeah, so somebody from SIG PM would be great.
1 hour before, 8
Is it 1
o'clock.
hour?
Yep,
Oh,
8 o'clock
sorry.
Pacific time.
It's that kind of day, Caleb.
Also,
That's a
time
little bit
zone
more
math
reasonable.
is terrible. That's why
Yeah.
you can't program it.
Okay, if nobody volunteers, we'll corral someone next Tuesday to make sure we catch the following week.
Great, thanks so much.
All right, moving on the agenda. Tim, you've got a number of items, so let's start working our way down.
A couple of PSAs. The first PSA is there's a couple of PRs to update etcd to etcd 3.1.10. That's not controversial, really. Those PRs are both in flight. One PR to update the client. The other PR is to update the dependencies internally inside of what's run as part of the code base. So the defaults for a lot of the cluster up stuff. The second PSA is I'm starting.
Hold on, before we move on. Is that just for new clusters? Is there an upgrade path for existing clusters when you go from 1.7 to 1.8?
It should be a seamless upgrade. So it's one of those in-place things that the conversion should be done automatically. So if you're running 3.0.17, which is the default that we have been running for the 1.7 release, then we should be, the upgrade to 3.1.10 is just a manifest change.
Who's driving that upgrade?
Who is driving the upgrade?
Who is
It's part of the upgrade. It's part of the upgrade test by default. But this particular upgrade from 3.0.17 to 3.1.10 is non-controversial.
Well, I'm just asking, like, who's responsible for making sure it's EDE tested?
It'll be defaultly tested as part of the upgrade cycle. So it's part of the upgrade path because the manifest will change. So I will talk with Matt, I think was the person who did it last time for the 2 to 3. I'll CC him on this issue as well.
Also, Wojtek from Google, from the Poland office, was heavily involved in the 2 to 3 migration on our side. Justin, are you concerned about upgrading in COPS as well, I assume?
Well, also, I mean, we could have done better last time, and I would like to see maybe that we could do better this time, and also like add some testing for the 2 to 3 upgrade.
When you say we could have done better, do you mean the SIG, the Kubernetes community? Like, who is we in that sentence?
The process of upgrading left a lot of people behind. I'd say all real world users with existing clusters that are not running on GKE.
I'll just adamantly disagree to that, but we can take that offline because OpenShift had a well-defined plan. I was part of it. So.
Okay, well, all right, and OpenShift. I guess anyone that wasn't like had it done for them, right? So like we still have to do that in COPS.
Okay.
I don't think it's controversial that whatever install method that folks are using, whether it be COPS or OpenShift or GKE, there's a burden with the etcd 2 to 3 type of thing, and I'm not sure, based on the way, because we just don't have any sort of unified view of this stuff, I'm not sure if there's sort of an easy button that we can actually create for folks to actually make that problem work. I think there's lessons to be shared across the different methods in terms of how they do stuff, and maybe, you know, writing the guides and those lessons could have been done better, for sure. I mean, I'm not quite sure how we can make this as turnkey as we want to.
Well, concretely, for example, we had a turnkey procedure for the upgrade from SCD2 to SCD3 in the 1.5. I don't remember the number. 1.5 release, and we discovered, like, in the dying days of the release, that it nuked every HA cluster. So, you know, the decision was made to proceed with etcd3. I think certainly less behind people that had HA clusters.
Well, there was a process that we had evolved, which was to turn down your members, do the upgrade, and you have an offline upgrade, right? Like we actually had this documented, that your upgrade will be offline, turn down your members to 1, offline upgrade, then turn back up your members and add members again. So, but this is history now. I think for going forwards, the reason why we're doing a 3.1.10 upgrade in this cycle is to prevent the minor version bump. So we want to keep in lockstep with minor version additions as we upgrade. So that way it's totally non-controversial and it should be seamless to Kubernetes clusters. We specifically did not go to 3.2 because there was even the slightest amount of questioning if that could cause an issue. So by keeping in lockstep as we go down the path, it should make it pretty seamless.
And this then implies that therefore every Kubernetes upgrade from now on will be required to go through, like, each, you know, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 version.
There's going to have to be the tests. Part of the upgrade tests are from a 2-cycle release upgrade process. So it's going to be part of the release folks' process to validate that bump and shift.
Yeah, I mean, you see what I'm saying, right? Like now, so now if you're saying we're not going to 3.2 now, that means we don't want to go to 3.2 in 1.9, because then the 1.7 to 1.9 upgrade, which will be a supported upgrade, would be the same upgrade that you just described as controversial.
It's actually not clear to me that we support upgrading across 2 minor versions. We support version skew, like we support nodes being 2 behind, but it's not clear we actually support upgrading your master jumping twice. I don't think we actually test that.
I mean, there's a limit to how big the test matrix can get. I think, you know, the best we can do is try and pick some reasonable paths, document what's tested and what's not, you know. Otherwise, insanity, right?
Well, I'm saying as long as we document that, and so, like, as long as we know that, like, what we're saying is we will require, like, no double upgrades, as it were. We'll block that, I guess.
I guess I'm with Justin on that you know, really paying attention to the documentation here is essential, and, you know, I'm happy to volunteer to help out in whatever form and shape. So I totally agree with you. That's super important.
All right, anything else on that agenda item before we move along? Okay, next. Sorry, Tim, to derail you there. That seemed like it was important to dive into that a little bit, though.
Oh, no worries. The second PSA is I'm starting down the checkpointing road for self-hosting, and I'm deep in re-familiarizing, maybe the 4th familiarizing myself with the kubelet code. And I need to talk with the sig-node folks, hopefully today, to make sure I insert at the right path, because it's a wonderkin. So it doesn't look that, famous last words, it doesn't look that difficult, but I'll see what I can do and see if we can get something in place in a reasonable amount of time.
Did you finish, I was out a couple weeks, did you finish writing up the document to share with sig-node about why we're doing this and what we plan to do? So
I wrote up an issue and I CC'd them on it because it was really simple. Lucas and I had a conversation where we went back and forth and we simplified it to the bare bones minimum. And then we have it's part of an issue and they're CC'd on the RFE for that issue. So.
Okay. it might be worth jumping in like the sig-node meeting, which I think is right after this, to bring that to their attention.
Yeah, I plan to.
Awesome, thanks.
So do we need a features issue for this?
I'll talk with them first, I think, before I write up a features issue.
Jason might be able to answer this. Do we write features issues for alpha features?
Yes, absolutely.
I guess so.
Then we probably need a features issue for this.
Okay. But yeah, talk to them and write one if needed.
Yep.
Do feature issues, do we write those for user-facing changes or all changes?
Well, that's tricky. It's preferable to have them for all changes because it's not necessarily user consumed. Sometimes it's somebody who gets into the code and wants to understand how to leverage a feature. So,
and also it's like there are many Kubernetes consumers. There are like parsers or whatever that's using the core code to set up something.
Right.
Like a Kubernetes cluster like we do with kubeadm.
All right, next up, someone put sig-apps, but Lucas and I both attended the sig-apps meeting yesterday to talk to them about daemonset strategies. Lucas, do you want to give a summary of that?
Yes, so there were some discussions whether we'd use new, well, first of all, daemonsets are going to be moved from the extensions v1 beta 1 API group to the apps v1 beta 2, as well as all other apps objects are going to be in the v1 beta 2 group in the end of 1.8. That's their goal. And we asked for this add first then delete method being added as a feature at the same time, like when doing this graduation from the extensions to apps group. They said that they think it's too risky to make the max unavailable field to allow 0 in the max unavailable field, because they don't know exactly what would change, and code that is tested would be and is going basically to GA is, well, it's controversial to change that code and validation and control that stuff. So we agreed that we're going to use a new upgrade strategy instead, something like rolling upgrade at first and delete. And that's a net new feature. Probably in Olf, I don't know, that we didn't discuss that. And Aaron is going to assign some guy from CoreOS to work on it. And I don't know if Tim will come in as well or similar, but sig-apps will help review, at least they thought that they would have the bandwidth. But yeah, I think that's mostly it.
Yeah. So they did sort of commit to doing reviews. I think Eric was a little reluctant, but a couple other people on the call said they'd be happy to review the change. So I think we're good to go there. And Aaron did say that he had someone that he could have start working on the proposal for this. So they're going to start diving into the code and seeing what it would look like to change this and fire off a proposal shortly.
Yeah, so I don't think he's on the call right now, but Diego is going to take a look at this. And so we'll probably report back to both this SIG and the app SIG as well.
Sorry, I didn't see you here, Aaron. Sorry to speak for you.
Oh, no worries.
So yeah, I think that's in it on that topic. They said that it's possible to do net new changes even after it's GA. So if it misses this release, we can do it later on, but well, preferably this release from our perspective, to avoid doing the hacky things.
Exactly. All right, next, Justin, you've got something about the kubeadm working group.
Yes, indeed. So the kubeadm working group is kicking off. We are going to have our inaugural meeting immediately following this meeting. Sorry for the short notice. I don't expect everyone to be able to attend, but hopefully we can at least start the ball rolling. We sent out that spreadsheet. There were not a lot of times which worked, but this one was basically a clear winner. I think there was only one person that had a negative opinion of it at all. So this was the best slot that was available to us, which is probably why it overlaps with sig-node, but there we go. So yeah, so after this, we'll try to use the same Hangout. I'm not sure that will actually work, but if we can, the same Zoom, we'll try to use the same Zoom if we can. And if not, I will send around a different Zoom in Slack or something, but hopefully we can just keep it open. That's it.
Excellent. Yeah, and that was sort of previously announced as something that we were starting up on the mailing list. So hopefully, even if people missed the announcement of the first meeting starting today, people at least know that this is happening and can jump in next week. That's intended to be weekly or bi-weekly?
I don't know. We can talk about it, I guess, in the meeting and see how people feel. We might move to purely electronic or purely text. We'll see.
Cool. All right, Joe, you're up.
Figure out how to unmute. Yeah, so we hit this issue. So we don't have a good idea across any SIGs in terms of how decisions are made. It's more of a sort of consensus type of thing. It works most of the time. There's places where we need some sort of official type of decision-making sort of body and mechanism. And I think that as we slip into the governance model that's coming out, as part of that, I suspect, and again, I don't know, I can't predict where all this is going to go. I suspect that there's going to be effort to update and re-examine all the charters for the SIGs, and we're probably going to have requirements in those in terms of having some decision-making process documented in terms of who, how, and where, and why. I think what we're going to probably end up with is a standard starting point that a lot of SIGs can borrow from. And then it's up to the SIGs then to sort of, start someplace sane and then adapt to something that works for that particular SIG. That hasn't happened yet. The elections haven't happened for the, we're still in the process of doing the elections for the Bootstrap committee. So with that in mind, or for the steering committee, so with that in mind, I would love to just get input from folks here in terms of how do you think like a good way for us to sort of codify that would be? How do we, this is not an urgent discussion, but it's important for us to actually get there eventually. How do we decide who has standing? I think we can look at the list of folks who have, committers across the set of directories that are owners across a set of directories that matter. Who's a member of the SIG, but not necessarily a committer? How do we actually go about doing that stuff? So I just want to open the floor and get some feedback in terms of how people are thinking about this.
So Joe, one question is, does speak anything against modeling it as close as possible to the Apache Software Foundation?
Okay, so in what way? What part of that do you?
In general, well, essentially all the different projects it's up to them to decide what exactly the process is, but you have to have it in your charter. You have to clearly say, how is a release cut and how do you actually become a committer, and so on and so forth, like all of that. And I very appreciate that you have a kind of like boilerplate or whatever that you can draw from and then fill in details or change details, whatever. But looking at how Apache Software Foundation does it, I think is a good starting point, unless you have some other plans.
No, that's good. I think yeah, that's generally, this is where I predict and assume, and based on talking with folks, I think it's going to go, is that there will be autonomy at the SIG level for the SIGs to actually figure out how they govern themselves. There will be some requirements around, like, you just have to have something, and there might be other ways that other tests that it has to pass. It's a little bit different from the Apache project because this is sort of a sub type of thing. So it's like, whether, and some of this is like, okay, so what does a release mean, right? So like at some point we may have things like kubeadm releasing out a ban from the rest of Kubernetes. is that part of SIG release? What is the Kubernetes release, right? I mean, like as this stuff breaks up, those lines become a lot blurry.
I guess that is the biggest challenge, really, because as these SIGs are really interdependent, and like in the Apache Software Foundation, all these projects essentially can just do whatever they like on their own. They're not really interdependent. But that is the big question: who is going to decide the cross-SIG?
Yeah. So the cross-SIG stuff. I mean, that's the idea that there is. At the end of the day, the buck is going to stop with the governance committee. The governance committee doesn't want to make a lot of decisions directly, so they're going to delegate a lot of that to things like SIG architecture or the API, approval process. And so a lot of the cross-SIG stuff is going to get discussed there in terms of technology. In terms of policy for how things get done, that'll be delegated to other places. So there's conformance. What does it mean to actually be a conformant cluster? That'll probably be driven out of SIG testing. What does a Kubernetes release look like? That'll probably be driven out of SIG release, and what are the requirements around that? So I think there's a bunch of places where we have cross-cutting things, and that all won't get concentrated into one place. That'll actually be distributed across a bunch of things. But I think the question here is that I'm assuming that there's going to be some ability for SIGs to govern themselves. And the question is, how does this SIG want to view that? What makes sense for this SIG? We have this sort of a little bit of a split personality where there's a lot of concentration on kubeadm, but obviously the scope and the charter of cluster lifecycle goes beyond that. And I think that we need to make sure that we do service to that larger scope. So as we do governance stuff, we want to make sure it's not dominated by the sort of practicalities around kubeadm. Other thoughts from folks? All right. Well, feel free to noodle on that. I just want to keep banging the drum that this is not going to go away. It's important stuff. Oh, Lucas, did you have something?
Yes. So one thing I guess we have to figure out is now we have the owners files, and I think right now we have 4 or 5 approvers and 8 to 9 reviewers. So what's the process to get there, and how do we remove folks that haven't been active? I mean, Ilya is still he did a lot of effort in the beginning of kubeadm's lifecycle, but now hasn't been active for quite some time. So we remove him then from the approvers file, or do we have some inactivity period?
Yeah. Well, so I think one change that I would like to see is right now the owner files are really tilted around people and not SIGs, and I actually think that creates a confusing mishmash of if I want to make changes in this directory, who do I talk to, right? You get a list of people to talk to, but in reality it should be, hey, if I'm going to be making changes in this part, here's the SIG that I want to coordinate with, because there's going to be a lot of stakeholders there. So I think the first thing is having directories roll up to SIGs, but that doesn't mean that everybody who's a maintainer in the SIG actually gets permissions across all those directories. It's up to us to figure out if we want to sub-segment that in some ways. So Tim, you were going to say?
So we started doing this with SIG scheduling because it was such a pain because things were fragmenting across the code base. So we started making aliases, and the alias files exist in the root. And you can update levels and create whatever aliases you want, right? So that way you can have your stratifications that you desire. I think that is a reasonable model and would probably work well for this case as well.
And I think that also, that works within Kubernetes/Kubernetes. There's obviously other repos that actually play in here also, and hopefully more and more repos over time as we move away from the mono repo. One of the things that's on my list is to make membership of teams and the organization and repo sort of permissions be data driven off of files that are checked in. So it's not going to be owners explicitly, but it'll be something similar where we can curate that in a sort of traceable, auditable, obvious way. So yeah.
So soon we need a repo that's yet another repo that needs that's Kubernetes/owners or Kubernetes/teams or.
There's a good chance. I got to write that tool. I have it sort of stubbed out right now. This is on me to actually do that, because I think that lets us move in that direction where we actually have, here's a file that says who should have permissions. Because right now GitHub tends to hide that stuff, and it's become sort of a confusing mishmash of who does what, when, and where. I mean, maybe that'll be part of the community repo. Maybe it'll be a different repo. But yeah, exactly, right? There's going to be one place that says, or like the owner's aliases. Do we want to share that across repos instead of having it be just a Kubernetes thing?
Yeah, so that's what I meant. Like, should we have some kind of canonical place to define these aliases and then like consume them in places all across, like could be even be for incubator repos. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and it's something that I hadn't been thinking about, is the connection between owners and this sort of team permission thing here, because there's obviously some overlap across those things.
Oh yeah.
I guess for my, I dropped in a link to my notes because I had looked at a bunch of different open source governance models in the past, and the lead up to the governance discussion we were having here.
Is that Caleb?
Yeah, that's me.
Release.
Yeah.
All right.
But I guess also I turn. Today, in terms of owners and approvers, and they found it was too much work to maintain the automation for that it was not valuable work. So they had worked on reducing the number of the stratifications of permissions, which is, if we decided we wanted to do, if we're okay with doing something like that, it's nice because GitHub teams are rather limited in their permissions. It's not like the full set of things that you get from like GitLab. So if we could have a thing where it's like, just like 2 levels, like you could read the repo, or maybe 3, you could read the repo, you could write the repo, or you can change the repo with administrative things. I think that would be nice to decide at either a SIG or a cross-project level. So we could have, I don't think we're going to move from GitHub anytime soon. So making use of the platform would be nice rather than not, at least in my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I think the owner's files are an artifact required by the monorepo. As we move to a more segmented world, I'm hoping that we won't need the owner's files mechanisms for individual smaller repos. I think the fact that we need those is a sign that maybe the repo's too big.
I would agree. Although we have some serious challenges about how to stitch the repo back together once we explode it.
We're going to have to solve that regardless. I don't think, I don't think
right.
We're that.
Yes, I agree. But I would love to have all of the brain cells rubbing together on that challenge to actually stitch together back binaries at the end of the day.
Yeah. All right, so I don't have any answers here. I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to sort of, make sure that folks were thinking about this and we were taking some time to think about how does this SIG want to govern itself. So we will have some autonomy in terms of how we decide things. So, yeah.
Thanks, Caleb. Awesome document. That's great.
I guess I'd say like our goal, like what is our goal? Like we could define our goal as like adoption of kubeadm, and maybe we'd expand the scope of kubeadm to encompass other things, but I'm not sure we actually have a concrete goal that we are heading towards otherwise.
You mean in terms of like the SIG charter, Justin?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I feel like we've drifted from the SIG charter a little bit, right?
I don't know. I guess I feel like we've been focusing on a subset of the SIG charter, which is actually something I want to talk about later in the meeting, which is how we can continue to drive that, but also expand what we're working on, right? I think it was somewhat necessary for us to focus at the beginning because there were a relatively small number of people that were actively working, and if everybody was doing something different, we wouldn't have made any progress. So I think that was useful. But I think now we're starting to grow. We have some more people, and we can expand the scope of what we're working on, like to actually fulfill some of the other parts of our charter.
No, but I agree with Justin. I think it's worthwhile for us to, we don't have to do it right now, but to take another honest look at the SIG charter and say, is this where we want to go? Does this represent, what our goals are right now? And part of the governance of the SIG is actually over time re-examining, making sure that we're staying true to that charter, or modifying the charter, or modifying our activities to make sure that those things are aligned. So yeah, that seems totally reasonable. Okay, it's all squishy, wishy-washy stuff. I mean, it's not like, PRs and stuff, but I think over time this stuff ends up being important. So I want to make sure we don't lose focus on it.
Awesome. All right, next up, Alexander, or CAD on GitHub, linked to a PR. So Jeff Grafton has been adding support to the build process to be able to push CI images as we're building each CI build up into GCR buckets, which was unblocking the PR linked here to support using CI images in kubeadm ED tests, which is something that was on our list for 1.8. So it's awesome that there's a PR out. Joe?
Is it, I haven't checked recently, is it possible for me to create my own and push it to my own bucket, sort of so I can doing a full test before actually submitting to CI/CD?
That I don't know about. That's a good question. I mean, presumably you should be able to override the registry or bucket you're pushing to, but I don't know if Jeff plumbed that through the scripts.
Yeah, last I looked at those tools, there was a bunch of sort of, assumptions that made it tricky to do that, but I haven't looked in a while. So, okay, well, we'll get there. Lucas?
Well, yeah, I'd say it's definitely possible. I mean, we just have the image repository and you can override it to whatever you want. And well, I don't know if we have the pushing tooling, but on the other hand, it's not that hard to first build your images. There's tooling for that, and then just do Docker push to Docker Hub or whatever, and then in kubeadm just specify that I want to use the Docker Hub user looks instead of GCR.
I mean, so Lucas, I would love. I mean, I think it's possible, but I think there's a certain amount of I want to be able to build all the release artifacts, with JBeta in the name, just like they're built for the real release, right? And any delta there, I think is going to introduce issues over time. So that's, yeah, there's a thing of degrees there for sure. Go ahead, Lucas. Sorry.
Yeah. So we have support for the Hypercube image as well, which is not that official.
Yeah.
Which is great for this dev flow. I mean, you just build your Hypercube image and it's just 2 commands or something, and then just use it from kubeadm. But on the real release side, I guess that's more a SIG release thing. How do I make this release? I don't think actually there's something wrong with kubeadm, because I mean, if we had this thing that you could push to Joe Beta, Docker Hub user or whatever, some GCR repo, it's really straightforward to hook up kubeadm to use that. It's just this release thing that is not great right now.
Well, I think that there's not just the Docker images. There's also the debs and the RPMs are part of that too. But where did you want to say?
Yeah,
something?
I had a use case for this feature too, even beyond local testing, where I had an offline cluster that we wanted to install from either pre-pulled images or from a local mirror. And so I needed to change all the image names to pull from that mirror. For sort of an air-gapped kind of cluster.
Definitely something else altogether that we have to think through.
So I've literally set up everything by myself, build everything from scratch, do my own thing, so I understand all the bits in place. But the problem is turnkey automation and getting buy-in from SIG release, because there are no owners, right? I have everything there from an RPM perspective, right? And I would even like to turn it down even more and just have a single container and do atomic install, and then I'm done, right? Then I just need to manage a single container, which is the Hypercube-ish with kubeadm together smashed into one, and I'm done. But there's a general problem of ownership of the release process and the release artifacts. So I don't know how we solve that problem, and I don't know if that's within our charter to solve that.
I mean, that was discussed at the leadership summit, and I think everyone was sort of maybe leaning towards having SIG release own that. I think that's back to the what our charter is. I think that's sort of well outside of our charter to try to solve that problem. It doesn't mean that people that are working on this can't also work on that, but I don't know that we want to do it under the auspices of the SIG cluster lifecycle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a sort of dev and test, and sort of if we make it easier to sort of do the official thing as we dev and test, hopefully we'll avoid some of the fire drills that we hit every time we bring it all together come release time, right? That's, I think, the ultimate goal for me, at least.
Cool. All right, so also I think that last agenda item was also, please look at this PR so we can get it in. So
yeah, so
some review cycles.
I think Hippie Hacker was about to say something.
Oh, okay.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Within the CI working group, we've got a cross-cloud CI platform that we've been working on that's pulling in the Kubernetes repos and building the artifacts. We've been pushing to a per project Docker Hub or registry and deploying via our cross-cloud provisioner. But one of the things that's kept us away from using kubeadm is actually being able to pull in the artifacts per commit because they weren't generated. I'm sure this sounds like it's a good segue to maybe bringing in kubeadm so that we can use our own artifacts or find some way to pull that into our pipeline for using kubeadm. Right now, the reason we've stayed away from it is being able to specify our Kubernetes binaries and images during the deploy that we weren't able to do, sounds like, before this commit. Go ahead.
So I think that's possible. Like but we are probably very, we document it poorly, I guess. So -Kubernetes version specifies like all the tags for like its registry and kube API server and the Kubernetes version value, and you can specify both the repo like name and the tag the version. But I don't know if that's sufficient, but that's possible to do and has been for quite some time.
This will also be a great discussion to have during Justin's next meeting about kubeadm adoption. So I think one of the things to discuss there is what is preventing everyone from using kubeadm in production scenarios. And it sounds like this is a great use case that either isn't well enough documented or supported.
I'll be sure to be on that meeting.
Just real quick, are you using the Anago stuff to actually build Kubernetes, or are you building your own automation around building Kubernetes?
Say again?
Are you using the Anago tools to build Kubernetes, or are you building your own automation?
I'm not sure about Anagoat.
Anago. Okay, so that's in the release. What is it? Kubernetes/release repo has the set of tools that.
Yes, we're using the release.sh. Yeah.
Is that? I don't think.
Anago is really googly.
It's very Google specific.
Yeah, I had to pull out a lot of stuff and comment things in order to get the pipeline to function. We do it on the fly, just slight modifications.
So a release.sh out of Kubernetes/Kubernetes?
That just builds containers.
Yeah. Yeah, you should look at stuff in github.com. I'll put it in the /Kubernetes/release because that's how the real releases are done. That's we should find the one thing that we all line up on here. And this is really a release thing, obviously, but.
Different release altogether, a repo.
Yeah, that's why it's like everything else in Kubernetes. There's like 12 ways to do everything, right? So this is I think hopefully with SIG release getting off the ground, there's an opportunity to start bringing this stuff together. That tool, unfortunately, though, is pretty googly. That's the one thing that I think we need to work through. And it's not it's not maliciousness. It's just expediency.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect charter for SIG release.
As I understand that tool, it's also run by a human.
Yeah.
Which is pretty scary.
I think some of this might be used as part of the CI/CD stuff, but I'm not sure.
Human has to run it, and you go.
What's that?
A human with credentials has to run the script.
Yeah, it is not part of test infra. So the test infrastructure for CI/CD is completely orthogonal to the SIG release.
Okay, so that seems like a problem also.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to table this discussion so we can keep moving. We have a few more agenda items. Tim, you're up next.
That was just a PSA on test coverage. During the 1.7 release cycle, I've been lucky enough to review a number of PRs from the community and other folks for fixes that occurred in the 1.7 release. And there's been a number of them. I know as we add new features, and getting those tests and automated tests in place before a release or having some level of, I don't know what we want to call it, during the end of the cycle where we kind of update our test coverage, is probably pretty crucial because we went out the door with 1.7.0 with some pretty massive flaws. And then I see Lucas is smiling because he's the one who submitted the PRs and I reviewed them. So I don't know if you have comments, Lucas. We can't hear you, Lucas.
Well, I don't think it was that bad. Do you mean kubeadm or like general Kubernetes release?
The kubeadm, there were some config issues. There were a couple other ones. There was like I counted 7 total, 7 or 8 cherry picks between 1.7.1 and 1.7.2.
Yeah, so I think most of them were pretty minor, but there was actually something that's like a cherry pick that caused a regression. That was, well, bad, but otherwise it was pretty good. I think mostly like low-hanging fruit, like adding the notification for like this is happening in 1.8 with a 24-hour deadline and such thing. But yeah, you're completely right. There were quite some cherry picks, but I don't think like there was anything like at no point it was really crucial, like blocking the usage of kubeadm. It was more like this is suboptimal, right?
Well, one of them was that was I think Moyer commented on it too. There was one that was broken by default, and it was a regression. There was also I'm struggling to recall, but there were 2 total that could have affected people that were, had used existing means by which we were deploying. So there's just a gap in test coverage, is the general statement.
The test coverage gap in this case was we didn't have end-to-end tests that covered the config flag for kubeadmin.
Yes, it's more like integration or so we had unit tests for this, but the problem was something with Cobra initialization, and well, so in the unit test they worked well, but like for real, sometime like Cobra hadn't invoked something to be able to like populate these kind of things. So it was, well, kind of messy, but yeah.
I'll just say one other plug, which I put in the notes, is that when we were doing planning for 1.8, everyone agreed that testing was really, really important, and we marked it as a P0 priority. And so sort of in line with what Tim was saying, if you're adding new features, please make sure you add test coverage for them. And ideally, we'd also be backfilling test coverage for older features that don't have it. Lucas?
Yeah, so I think a unit test coverage is pretty good overall. Like I mean, we had even unit tests for this, and now our EDE is also pretty good. We still need to get the pre-submit tests in. I mean, I think unfortunately I think that's blocked on Jacob's ability to like rebase or something. I don't know. It would take quite a lot of time for me at least to like read in all the stuff that's needed. But if Jacob is unable to, I can take over that part. But basically, we need this like on every PR before we merge as like statement on whether this breaks kubeadm or not. But then what we are really need for is like kubeadm E2E tests, that we have like kubeadm specific E2E tests. That's what we're lacking, and that's what caused this regression that Tim talked about. Is that we didn't test. Yeah, we're testing all the time, like the normal setup, but we, for example, didn't test with config, and this broke config in a real invocation. So, and I've asked some how run Wang will work on this, at least to some degree, and also we got which is later on the agenda here, Bootstrap tokens are now E2E tested. So in the E2E job against head, we have some feature Bootstrap tokens E2Es running, and they are all green. So that was one of the requirements for getting this feature to beta. So I think we're doing better, but I'd love to see more like feature kubeadm E2Es there. It's not that hard to write, but it definitely takes time to cover a lot of cases. So more variation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good sort of getting started project if someone is looking to get their feet wet, is to add an EDE test or two, right? Because it shouldn't be too difficult, and it'll make you learn your way around the code. Right?
No,
so, go ahead, Lucas.
No, it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of examples, but to get the syntax right might be tricky.
All right, so you had another PSA after the Bootstrap token one.
Yeah, so just a heads up that the upgrades proposal is converted to Markdown without styling, but I'll fix that up after I've addressed all the other comments that may pop up. It would be great to have some, if it looks good, I mean, we've discussed this for some weeks now, so if it looks good to everyone, just hit LGTM when you have fixed needs and style or something to get buy-in from our own SIG, so it can be merged, right? It would, from Joe, Tim, Robert, etc.
I'll do my best to take a look today. Although Justin scheduled another meeting for me after this, so we'll see. Let's see, Lucas, one more. Please take a look at, you linked to another poll in the community repo.
Yeah. So just, this has been a long run. Updates the token discovery thing for beta, right? So it's just a couple of changes, not much, but it would be great to get it in as well. Joe, Robert, maybe relevant assignees.
This is 628, or which one am I looking at?
Yeah.
628.
Okay. I will add that to my list.
The next thing I wanted to sort of briefly mention is sort of along the lines of what we discussed earlier about sort of expanding the scope of the SIG outside of just kubeadmin. So kubeadmin is sort of the place we drew the line initially of where we wanted to focus, because it abstracted away all of the underlying infrastructure for setting up machines, whether you're on bare metal or on a cloud or somewhere else, right? And so we could say, once you've got all of those machines up, we can make a consistent install experience from there on forward and drive consistency across the platforms. I think it's starting to become a little bit more clear that we also want to at least think about having more consistency at the layer below that in terms of a cluster level API. And so I know I've had some conversations with a couple of people about this and what this might sort of look like. Chris Nova had sent out Kubicorn with sort of a straw man. I think it's somewhat based on the Copt API also. I think there is general consensus from what I've heard that people want this to be a sort of Kubernetes style API that looks like the rest of the Kubernetes APIs. It uses Kubernetes API machinery. And so I just wanted to sort of say that we as in a couple of people, myself included, are going to start looking at what this API might look like. I don't think we're quite at the point of spinning off yet another sort of sub-meeting from the larger group, but it's something that's going to hopefully start to gain steam sometime within the next month or two. So, I just wanted to put that out there. If people are interested, please ping me or talk to Chris or let us know how you want to get involved.
Can we send out an email just highlighting this out to the SIG cluster lifecycle mailing list, and then we can sort of go from there?
Yeah, it's been on my list of things to do, and I haven't gotten to it yet.
I can take responsibility for sending that out if we want.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Joe, one more thing.
So on that note, I think there's some interesting ideas that folks are starting to play around with, where it's writing controllers for managing infrastructure also versus just sort of one-shot type of stuff. And so I think the Lucy guys have done some really interesting, prototyping and work here also. And I know that Chris has been syncing up with them. So I don't know if that's part of this effort also, but I think it's super exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, I think at least in my mind, the effort is like, we sort of have fragmented the community around this aspect of getting started with Kubernetes. And kubeadm was sort of one effort to drive some consistency, and this is sort of another effort to drive consistency. And part of that fragmentation has been that there's been sort of a lot of exploration of different ways to do this, right? We've got great examples from all the different tools people have built, and we need to like sort of look at what those APIs look like and what types of features people think are important in their cluster level API, and try to figure out how we can sort of pull that together so that we can, if we build yet another cluster provisioning tool that doesn't actually meet people's needs, it's not going to get any adoption. It's not going to drive consistency. Right? So part of the effort here is to sort of analyze the existing landscape and try to get all of those people as stakeholders and involved. Lucas.
Yeah, so basically it's driving consistency. If we had 3 layers, one is like provisioning, and then it's bootstrapping, and then add-ons. Justin is working on like the add-on manager, which is layer 3. We have kubeadm for layer 2, and now we're gonna look into something for layer 1.
Yes, it's not just provisioning though; it's also sort of lifecycle in terms of upgrades as well, right? Yeah. So it'll be something that can drive upgrades at the level below kubeadm.
So underlay, I mean, like it'd be great if we actually had a vocabulary that we could actually, use here.
Yes.
So I don't have one, but it'd be great to have one.
Michael, you had your hand up too.
We want to accomplish with the API is to start giving us a working jargon that we can use and discuss amongst the infrastructure folks.
I think Tim just volunteered to put together the taxonomy, right, Tim? Just a question for clarification in terms of the scope of the charter. Like, who owns that, and what would be the next step to provide input?
I think that's all up for discussion. We want to introduce the idea, then we're going to sort of make a list of our concerns, and once we have those concerns like mapped out, we can look at next steps.
Right. But who's going to kick that off?
I think Chris is volunteering to kick that off.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, we got 1 more minute, and Lucas has one more issue to link to here.
Okay, so now I'm not muted. So just a quick one. Like, we wanted debs and RPMs to be pushed automatically for 1.7. That didn't make it. SIG release wasn't created, like kind of at the time. At least not in the position to make something new. Just get the release out the door. So now for 1.8, do we want to push for this to get these out? I mean, I don't know. I don't think 1.7.2 is out yet on kubeadm. Like, it was released Friday, and now it's depending on some Googler to push. And it's documented inside of Google, yes, but it isn't run by Anago, and requires it always like takes these at least 24 hours. Yeah, and it's very error prone to have a human remember that, oh, well, I should go and push these. We released yesterday. So are there any volunteers to do this?
Sorry, what were you going to say, Lucas?
Are there any volunteers from this group?
What does this mean? Like, as I understand it, like, it can't be automated because Google is the one with the key. So only Google can automate it.
I think you would need to put it in Anigo so that the Googler who is running the script is also going to be pushing the debs and RPMs. And we could try and voluntolding the branch manager, since that person is a Googler, and should be familiarizing themselves with Inigo right now. So we could try putting that on their list of things to do.
Can you CC him or something on the issue?
Yeah.
Just so I know. Yeah. But also it's like, as part of this effort, it's going to be a GCS bucket instead of like, so we can, with a GCS bucket, we can have different permissions. Like we can have the stable locked down to just Googlers, and we can have the unstable locked down to maybe maintainers or the like, so that other people actually are able to push CI versions or whatever.
Yeah, I think building CI versions of those and pushing them would be really nice too. I mean, yeah, ideally I'd be able to do sort of like the full kubeadm install flow, including the debs and RPMs from any CI version or from something that I built myself.
Yeah, so I checked, I looked at this, and I think I have some cycles to like at least provide guidance. And I also tested making it, but it depends on some Googler or something to actually make a GCS bucket for it, like take responsibility for maybe making sure it's working, like on every new release and those kind of things. So just a heads up.
Yep.
All right, we're 2 minutes over time, so I'm going to call it and stop the recording. And I believe we can use the same Zoom to transition to the next meeting. So I'm going to